But whatever one perceives to be manhood or being a man, whatever idea one has of being a man, good or bad, healthy or unhealthy, it affects what one aspires towards becoming, if not what you find yourself behaving like or emulating. Welcome to the Architecting Through Life podcast, where we dig into principles for building ourselves up as individuals while navigating the realities of this thing called life. The podcast is dedicated to young adults and anyone with the deep hunger to grow in their journey of being all that they were created to be. My name is Simon Gubeni, and with each episode I'll be discussing thoughts and insights drawn from life, from the Bible, from unique experiences, as well as from other great minds and mentors. Thanks for joining me on this journey, and I do hope that you'll enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Architecting Through Life podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If it's your first time tuning in, welcome. If it's not your first time, I'm really glad that you found value enough to check back in again. In today's episode of the podcast, I want to get into a discussion on thoughts on manhood. And particularly defining what it means to be a man. Right? As you know, one goes through life, as you go through architecting through life, I guess, there's points in life where you have to transition between being a child to being a man, whatever you define that to mean. And so even with me being, 28 at the time of this recording, a young man, the idea of what manhood means, I guess in this day and age even, is something that can be quite contentious depending on the lens that you wear when you look at it. But whatever one perceives to be manhood or being a man, whatever idea one has of being a man, good or bad, healthy or unhealthy, it affects what one aspires towards becoming, if not what you find yourself behaving like or emulating as you grow. So that's why I think the idea of looking at understanding manhood or what it means to be a man became something that personally was a pursuit so that I could be able to say that I am a man who's worthy of the title, you know what I mean? And I think how that relates not only just to young guys or guys like myself who want to be the best men they can be, also for women to be able to say like what kind of man one wants to be with, to be able to judge and estimate a man rightly by whatever definition or standard that they use, And so I want to get into a few thoughts on this idea of what it means to be a man. And in today's episode, it's just going to be defining what I find or what I grow in understanding the term man to mean. I don't present this more as an authority, but as a learner on the journey and sharing my notes as I grow and learn along the way. So there's different ways to give meaning to a thing, right? When it comes to giving meaning to something, you can either do so by comparison, you can either do so by description, or you can do so by actually defining. And when I say comparison, you can give meaning to a thing by comparing it to another thing. So when you give meaning to a sport, you compare it to what it's not. So if you're saying basketball is that thing that is like netball, but the difference is X, Y, and Z, or rugby is that thing which is like American football, but it's different in X, Y, and Z. So by comparing, right, and another term we could use is by juxtaposing, right, by placing it alongside another thing in order to give it its meaning. And so one of the ways in which we give things meaning is by comparison, right, comparing or juxtaposing or contrasting one thing against another in order to give meaning to it. The other way in which we define things is by description, right? By description is basically by outlining or expressing the various features of a thing in order to identify what it is, right? So if you want to describe what a car is by its features, that thing made out of metal with rubber tires and four doors and a glass windshield and an engine and all of those things. Basically, one of the ways in which as human beings we give meaning to things is by looking at the various features that make that thing up, and then that's how we then understand what it is. But another way in which we give meaning to things is by actual definition, right? Basically looking at the essence of what a thing is. And the essence of what a thing is, despite every other thing that you can say about it, and despite whatever it may be compared to, right? So when you give it its definition, you're defining it as it is, regardless of whatever it is you may compare it against, right? So when you say that water is hydrogen H2O, you're defining it as what it is, regardless of what it is as compared to oxygen or as compared to carbon dioxide or what. You're defining it by what it is. And I think that when it comes to us as individuals and as society defining manhood, we so easily get to defining or giving meaning to manhood by comparison and by description, but seldom by definition, right? And so when we say what is a man, right, we say a man is X, Y, and Z as compared to either women or as compared to either any scenario that you find yourself in, any illustration or allegory that you could find. But we tend to define manhood either by comparison or by description, right? And by description, basically going into the biology, that it's made up of whatever, it's certain kinds of genitalia, certain XY chromosome, certain biological features by description. And I want to look at the idea of manhood from the point of definition. Definition, and that's what we'll be doing in the series that we'll be having. But in today's episode, I want to look at what I believe is a very succinct but very valuable definition of what it means to be a man, right? And then we'll discuss the essence and the implications of that in a different episode. But I want to look at what it means to be a man in the simplest and most succinct term. And the best description which I could be able to observe is what we find when a man is defined as an adult human male, right? An adult human male, right? And you can flip those either as nouns or as adjectives, right? A male adult human, right? Or an adult male human or an adult human male. But it's the idea of an adult human male, right? And basically when we're looking at this idea of being a man, that's in simplest terms what being a man is, an adult human male, right? Adult basically being a reference to maturation, right? Being a full-grown, matured individual. Human basically referring to one's nature, right? As a being with a mind and a spirituality and a will and reason and certain capabilities and abilities and limitations, right? And possibilities as well. And male, right? Which is both a reference to biology and behavior, right, as their relationship to each other, both biological and behavioral traits, right, in general, right, which are generally shared amongst males, and that idea of an adult human male has certain implications, right, certain consequences which come with that description of being an adult human male, right, which I'll get into, but I maybe to go back a bit. I emphasized the point of definition earlier, right? And I emphasize it not necessarily to say that comparison or description are necessarily bad or not valuable, but it's to say that they're secondary, right? So in the sense that when you know the definition of a thing, right? If you were to look at definition, comparison, and description, when you look at the definition of a thing, you are then able to accurately give its descriptions, and you're also able to accurately compare it to other things, right? So that you're not comparing, as the term says, apples and oranges. You're comparing it against something which is its necessary equal, right? So that you're not comparing things which aren't necessarily of equal comparison, of valuable comparison. So if you are able to define something, you are then able to accurately describe it and also then accurately compare it to its necessary equal, right? And yeah, basically when I say it's secondary, so if we look at, for example, the essence of a car, right, as an example, if we were to say that a car is a motor vehicle that is able to transport you from A to B and say that that's the definition, right, in its essence, that a vehicle, we can define it, a car, we can define it as a motor vehicle that is able to take you from point A to point B, at its definition, we're also then able to accurately describe it, right? We can describe a car as being something with, as I said, four wheels, metal framing, an engine, windscreen, a steering wheel, etc., right? We're able to describe it because we've given its definition. And we're also able to compare it, right? Or to contrast it and say that, no, a car having certain features, being a motor vehicle that can take you from A to point B, is not a bicycle, right? It is not a boat, right? It's not a bus, right? Right? It's not all of those things. We're able to contrast and compare it against those things, having given it its definition, right? And at times when we go the other way, when we try to give something its definition by starting with its features, we can miss getting to the essence of what that thing is. Right? So if we're to say that the essence of a car is the fact that it has an engine and a wheel, that doesn't distinguish it from a truck or a bus, right? If we were to say that it can get you from A to point B, that doesn't distinguish it from a bicycle or a boat, but only give it its definition, its meaning, its essence. We're then able to accurately compare it and accurately describe it. And I think it's the same with humanity or with man as well, right? We'll get to the discussion of humanity, but it's the same with man as well, right? Adult human males as well. That when we're able to define the essence of being a man, right? And then we'll get into the implications in following episodes. Being a man is a adult human male, right? An adult human male. And having that definition, we're then able to rightly compare it, right? So that being an adult is distinct from being a child, right? Being an adult refers to maturity, being grown up, being responsible, as contrasted or compared to being a child, right? Being a male is obviously then as contrasted to being a female, right? Being compared to being or contrasted against being a female, and then being human, right, which is contrasted or can be in comparison to being an animal, so to say, or a beast, right, that you are distinct from being a child. As a man, you're distinct from being a female. As a male, as a human, you're distinct from being a beast or an animal, right? That's in terms of comparison, right? Contrast, juxtaposing between one and the other, right? And then once we had the definition of manhood, we can also then describe it accurately, right? That if the essence of being a man is an adult human male, the descriptions thereof in terms of being an adult, as I said, it's maturity, right? Maturation, responsibility, right? Being mature and grown up, right? In terms of understanding and knowledge. Being male, in terms of the descriptions of that, both biological and behavioral, as interlinked. And it's important for us to regard it as both biological and behavioral as interlinked, because if we limit it only to the biological sense, we can miss out on the big picture, right? That it's more than just certain biological traits, as naturalists would have us believe, that it's not only just the hormones and the what you could say, the genitalia or the physicality of that, though that is important in defining the male. But it is both that and the behavioral sense, that having high testosterone comes with certain behavioral inclinations or behavioral traits, right, which are in the very general sense, right, and which aren't necessarily exclusive also of the biological, that it's being male is both biological and behavioral, right? And so is being female, but we're discussing being a male or being a man. So we're saying that the descriptions of being a man, adult is mature, responsible, male is biological, behavioral, as can be described, and then human, right? Which is a being with a nature, right? And a mind and a reason, a spirituality. And above all of this, a being which the Bible describes as one who is created in the image of God, right? That's a text from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27, when it describes the origins of man, right? The narration of how humanity became into being, both male and female. But that both male and female, as human beings in their humanity, possessed the immense trait of being in the image of God, right? Which was both a spiritual trait, which is both in terms of their nature, which is both in terms of their mind. And in fact, that even goes as far as to say that the height of being a human is fully expressed when it comes with a knowledge and an understanding of being in the image of God, right? In fact, a book called Education, the author writes there that higher than the highest human thought can reach is God's ideal for his people. Then it says godliness and godlikeness is the goal to be reached. Then the author gives a wonderful unpacking of what that actually means in terms of individual responsibility. But the idea of being human is being in the image of God, being spiritual, being reasonable, like the ability to use the mind, the judgment, and the will, and having a conscience, right? But the point is that being a man is all of these together, right? It's being an adult, human male, right? Or an adult male human. And then all of these put together make up one who is a man in terms of definition. And I want to get into a few of these ideas and maybe express them further as we go through a series of discussions on thoughts on manhood. But for today, I just want to look at this idea that being a man is the idea of maturation, right? Being grown up, responsible, mature. His idea of being male, right? And embracing the true virtue and value of maleness, which is both biological and behavioral. And being human, which is both the ability to use the mind, the reason, the will, the judgment, and spirituality, all being in the image of God. And that all of those together are what it means to be a man. One can even look at them as being what one author will call a maturity continuum, right? That's Stephen Covey, but he doesn't obviously discuss them in the male sense, but I just like the term. That many of us are males, right? We don't choose to be male. There's no exercise of reason to being a male, right? Behaviorally and in large instances biologically, right? I mean biologically, and then in large instances behaviorally. There's no choice in being a male, right? Or at least there wasn't at some point. But in the far general sense, being a male comes naturally. Then many of us are then mature, right? All of us are male, right? In terms of guys or gents or boys, all of us are male. Many of us get to the point of being mature, but few of us get to or pursue the full expression of what it means to be human in terms of being in the image of God. And so this idea of being a man, the idea of being an adult, human, male. Just wanted to share the thought. I'm curious to know what your thoughts might be on that. Again, I share these as notes on my journey of growth and my journey of maturation, my journey of trying to be and share with others the experience of being the best man that one can be. Hope this can encourage a healthy discussion. Otherwise, my name is Simon, and I'm wishing you all the best on your journey of architecting through life. Much love. Thank you for listening to the episode that you've just heard on the Architecting Through Life podcast. If you found it valuable, please kindly do me the favor of sharing it and maybe leaving a comment if you'd like. I'd really like to get your thoughts, any impact that you might feel it may have, and do feel free to share it with someone else so that it can be a benefit to them as well. Thank you so much for your time, and do join us again on the next episode of the Architecting Through Life podcast.